but hopefully we'll manage to improvise. So, as Patricia said, I'm Heidi Hinder. I've recently completed a craft and technology residency at Watershed in Bristol, which is a cross arts multimedia centre, and that was funded by the Crafts Council. And it was my first opportunity to introduce digital technology into my practice, which originates in jewellery and silversmithing, as you'll see. And just this morning I wanted to talk a little bit about the process and value of collaboration. Oh, that's better. And the opportunity to incorporate digital technology, as I say, for the first time. So a bit about my background and practice. I studied jewellery and silversmithing at Birmingham City University. That course has actually now been renamed Jewellery and Related Products, which is perhaps a sort of suggestion of the shift in emphasis and the impact that technology is having on craft, moving away slightly from handmaking skills and making it a more sort of commercialised process. As a result. So this is actually a piece of traditional silversmithing which I made during my first year. It was a commission by the Royal Society of Arts, as you can see by the logo. And my my course in general was a combination of traditional handmaking skills in the learning process, as well as chemical and mechanical technology processes. And I just felt that this piece sort of summed that up slightly. I made it by starting off with sketching through pencil and paper, very traditional, and then doing technical drawings by hand. I made some models, including cardboard and the lid of a biscuit tube, very high tech, just to kind of get a feel of what that would look like in 3 dimensions. And then began working into the metal once I'd resolved those things in cheaper materials. So then this was hand scribed on metal sheet, combination of filing and sawing, using Rhino and CAD design and rapid prototyping, and then casting, annealing, pressing, soldering, polishing, electroplating, laser welding, engraving, enameling, and very technically gluing were the other processes used in making this piece. This piece is called Panopticam, a bit of a pun obviously on the Panopticon prison. It incorporates in the centre the little black circle there. It's got a miniature black and white video camera embedded within it, and it's actually about sort of palm size, has a brooch back, so you can place it at different points on your body to get a different perspective, as opposed to just the sort of eye view. And typically my work is concept driven. And so sometimes I found that the skills that I learnt during my course limited my ideas. And ideally, I wanted my 3-dimensional work to have a sort of 4th dimension, whether that was time-based or through sort of incorporating moving image and sound, in some ways making it experiential. So this miniature video camera was just purchased from Maplin's, which I always find slightly creepy that you can just buy small surveillance devices for, £20 at a high street store. So it's electronics and obviously reverses surveillance to a certain extent if you were to wear it, as you're able to. It's wearable technology in essence. So the design that you see inscribed and engraved on the surface has been influenced by Jodrell Bank and the telescopes and satellites that you see there, and looking at sort of espionage from space effectively, and also influenced by Steve Mann, who you may have heard of, who's very famous for wearable technologies in a kind of slightly robotics manner. So he developed an idea of surveillance, kind of reversing surveillance. And maybe at this point I should mention my background. This is a second career for me, and my background is in film and television, so I guess it was fairly natural that I'd try and incorporate some filmic device in my work. Do come in if you wish, don't be shy. Made them run away now. So bearing in mind the influences of the last piece from Jodrell Bank, This photographic image is obviously looking back up into space at the moon, and this was an image of the so-called supermoon taken in March 2011, which was a sort of astronomical event when the moon was the closest to the Earth it had been for about 18 years. And that sort of gives it the appearance of being larger than it normally is. So this was taken with a very long range camera lens, almost sort of verging on a telescope, obviously. And it shows a sort of detail of the lunar surface through the technology of the camera lenses, and obviously the digital technology, the digital software, which records the image file at this very detailed level. Even if you zoomed right in, you'd still get the kind of detail. So that photographic image you just saw of the moon has been translated directly into this piece here, which I basically extruded the pixels of the photograph and pulled them up into sort of 3 dimensions, as it were, into a low relief sculpture of the lunar surface. I've got this piece here just to sort of show the scale, pass it round in true show and tell fashion. And the idea with that piece is that, in essence, you can explore the lunar surface, an accurate representation of the lunar surface at your fingertips on a micro scale. And this kind of juxtaposition of the sort of astronomical size with the micro size kind of fascinated me. So this piece was actually created during a residency at the Royal Mint, using ArtCam software, if anyone's interested in the detail of the technology. And yes, it sort of fascinated me as well that the Royal Mint is one of the oldest companies in the world. It's over 1,000 years old, about 1,100 years old. But actually, this was the first opportunity I'd ever had to use quite high-tech processes. So they're very forward-thinking for a very traditional company. And the residency there was part of a year-long scholarship, which I was lucky enough to get, in designing coins and art medals, which are coin-like objects. And obviously, being based in the Mint, where people were making money out of making money, I became preoccupied with value and the production of money, and how that kind of was part of a commercial enterprise, the sort of paradox of making money from making money. So moving on to the concept of my craft and technology residency at Watershed, which the residency I called Money No Object, and obviously I'll come on to explain a bit more about that. The craft and technology residency, within that, I proposed to explore the impact of digital and smart technologies on currency and finance, and what we might value in future if little tangible physical objects are left, and if money is no longer an actual material physical object. I thought about the fact that trading relies on trust, and how it's difficult to trust something if you cannot see it or touch or feel or hear sort of the essence of it, and get a kind of tacit knowledge of it through sense, and through your human senses. For example, with Bitcoin and other digital currencies, you can't touch them. They're just sort of represented on a computer screen. So, as I say, I began to be preoccupied by concepts of value theory, and the craft and material practices of coin making, as well as the sort of social and cultural context of money and value. So referring to those cultural contexts, this last year, I don't know whether you remember, there was a news story about in China, a couple paid a record fine of 1.3 million yuan, which equates to about £133,000, for the privilege of having a second child. And elsewhere in China, only a month before that story, a teenager had sold one of his kidneys in order to buy an iPhone and an iPad, and he'd been recruited for this illegal trade through an online chat room. So these two extreme cases expose all too clearly how the value of life, the value of digital technology, and the metaphorical cost of living in the 21st century has become problematic. closer to home, a few years ago, my mum was involved in a serious road accident. So obviously it sounds a bit of a cliche to say it, but it's nonetheless true, to say that such life-changing events inevitably raise questions about what is most valuable and most valued. So that previous image was an X-ray of her head taken just after the accident. Fortunately, she had no head injuries. But this handheld sculpture is called Fractured Values, as you can see, and reveals the X-ray image that was taken of her skull, and it's etched onto medical-grade steel, giving it a spectral quality, causing it to disappear and reappear by turns in the light. Now, as an anatomical portrait of a now much recovered woman, the artwork seeks to highlight the fleeting nature of fortunes and value, as well as attempting to go some way towards exploiting the potential significance and power of a crafted object. And this is the reverse side. I was lucky enough to have this piece purchased by the V&A after it was on display at the V&A for their permanent collections. And arguably, this sculpture's value has been enhanced by its context and association with the museum. For example, on my website, this particular project received the most hits, and I'm sure it's just because the title happens to mention the Victoria and Albert Museum. So again, just kind of looking at value and value by association, and what is that? How does that work? And the association that that carries, the value that carries. So further to these questions of fortunes and value, Money No Object, the residency project, also tried to capture a certain zeitgeist reflecting global affairs, such as uncertainty about the price of commodities and dubious fiscal money markets. And inherent within this financial anxiety is both angst and fervour about all things digital and the indeterminate impact of technological advances on future monetary systems. At the end of last year, as Google lost $24 billion in approximately 8 minutes, the issues surrounding the digital and creative economy have never been more acute. In my view, however, it is undoubtedly the people and ideas, the human interactions and personal connections which form the vital resources needed to drive technology and communications forward and to drive innovation, determining in the process how and what we will value in future. The big question, money. So in the midst of all this angst between losing kidneys and losing billions, perhaps it is an equally relevant time to consider the concept of money as it is constantly in question and to reimagine it altogether, temporarily setting aside the burden of fiscal responsibility in order to refresh and re-engage our attitudes and to inspire new conversations about future currencies, whether these will be physical objects, digital representations, or continue to form a combination of both. So, as mentioned, the nascent ideas for my application to the Craft and Technology residency began to formulate during my short time at the Royal Mint. The money minting process itself clearly demonstrates the synergy achievable between craft and technology processes. Initially designed by hand on paper or computer software, the master coin pattern is hand-carved and sculpted on a 12-inch disc of plaster of Paris with other modelling materials, and then reduced down to actual size using more technology before being cut with laser beams. Laser beams, you saw very quickly. Checked and finished by hand, and finally stamped out in the factory line production by a machine. I'm sorry, those are all American images or American coins, but the Royal Mint is very high security. You can't take keys or phones or cameras onto site. You have it all confiscated at the door, and you go through this airport security system. So I wasn't allowed to take any photos, I'm afraid. So those were just ripped off the internet, which I probably shouldn't say considering it's being recorded, licensing. Anyway, similarly, in the 3 months of research and making during the Craft and Technology residency, I wanted to maintain this fluidity of process that we've just seen between learning about the capabilities and potential of digital technologies, while gradually integrating these with my own tacit knowledge and 3D making skills, and at the same time evolving the narrative behind each crafted coin or some other monetary token which could represent a given value. And this last point was something I began to focus on during my research, the idea that the value of any given object is essentially only relative to the knowledge attributed to it. And this relies on everyone understanding and believing in that narrative and then reaffirming it often enough for it to maintain its value. So in some ways, money, and this project is called Money No Object, it's not just about the power of material objects, but also about the power of the story of the object. So during the residency, I was also thinking about the extreme avarice and corruption that have contributed to the recent financial crises. What about giving value and not just gaining it? Altruism and egotism are, of course, two sides of the same coin. In every transaction, there takes place an exchange, a trade, and a trade-off. So I considered the idea of an added value coinage or a more creative monetary system, quite literally, as well as the possibility of dispensing charitable experiences in some way to give that invaluable feel-good factor. In developing concepts for a more interactive and egalitarian form of money, I recognise that part of the problem of technology lies in its ability to isolate the individual, as much as it gives rise for opportunities to meet other people through social media. Humans are social beings, and we all need each other. So the outcome for Money No Object, as shown in this short film in a moment, centres around the technology as a conduit for physical interaction, emotional connection, and shared human experience. So this is where the 6-minute short film, I'm afraid, has to leap to a slightly more basic form of technology. I'm just going to show it on my laptop, I'm afraid, because it doesn't work on the screen. My name's Heidi Hinder, and I'm an artist and maker. My background is in jewellery and silversmithing and literature, so both these two subjects often influence my practice. I've always wanted the objects that I make to trigger and create experiences. That's obviously proved quite difficult to do independently, so the Craft and Technology residency seemed like an amazing opportunity to realise that. My project is called Money No Object, and I've been looking at the role that physical currency plays and how it might become obsolete in future, and maybe if it does become obsolete with the rise of digital currencies, what we might therefore value instead and in its place. The theme of money is a huge subject in itself. Every day there's a new news report that's relevant to finance, currency, the global economic situation. And alongside a lot of reading and research, I've also tried to adopt an approach through making of making things fast and thinking through making, I guess. A few of the objects I've been making have been based on wearable technologies and the idea that you may be able to make a financial transaction through a physical gesture. So I've looked at 4 different physical gestures, one being a hug. So that's been called hug and pay. One, a handshake, a traditional handshake, which is the gentleman's agreement, a high five, and also tap and pay, play on words, which is where a tap dance could basically trigger a payment transaction. And I've gone about this by using RFID technology. That's the same technology which you find in Oyster cards. So using a reader and a tag, the 2 parts. And I'm currently making, for example, for the hug and pay, 2 brooches, one which a vendor might wear with the reader and one which a customer might wear, incorporating the tag. And the 2 people, in order to make the payment, have to hug and touch the brooches together in that gesture. I think increasingly with the rise of digital currencies, there's less opportunity to interact and communicate with humans. For example, there may be no need in future for a high street bank, and therefore the opportunities to go and just have a chat with someone and interact are decreasing. So the idea with the physical gestures and payment, the hug and pay, the handshake, those bring back a certain physical interaction and an opportunity ability for humans to engage in touch, which often sort of digital technology doesn't allow. The opportunity to work with Dan Williams, creative technologist, and within the Pervasive Media Studio in a collaborative way has been really valuable. It's something that I haven't had the opportunity to do before, and he's just been so supportive of someone who is a complete novice in this field.
My role in the project is to work with Heidi to explore technology in her practice, whether that's finding existing technical solutions or writing custom software, putting together hardware. Collaborations like this between craftspeople and technologists are valuable because currently much of the discussions and themes about the Internet of Things are very much driven by technology and business. So it's frequently about efficiency and not so much about the material or what to do with it or how it relates to people.
So I've been thinking about the context in which these transactional gestures might take place, and of course at the moment it wouldn't be possible for that to happen in an everyday context as much. So having experimented around Watershed, I was thinking of the value that it might be to have an alternative payment system like this within a cultural institution, perhaps kind of reinventing the clear plastic donations box that you often see in museum foyers. People would perhaps purchase the wearable objects as limited edition collectibles, for example, in the museum gift shop, and then they would load up the RFID tag with credit to spend within that building and within that organisation. And they would do that by perhaps hugging a cashier to hug and pay, or gaining some alternative emotional value to their payment transaction. This residency was really about starting a process of bringing together craft and technology, which I hadn't had the opportunity to do before. And it feels like the beginning of a vast body of research, which I'd like to continue with. And it's hard to express how much I've learned during this short time. It's been very intensive, but really fortifying in terms of confidence and in terms of opportunities for new ways of working. So since the official conclusion of the residency, I have received good press coverage about the project, including features on Humans Invent, which is a sort of technology-orientated website, and Wired. And this is not to show off or anything, it's just more the fact that I find it quite fascinating that even though the project is still very much at the prototype stage, in the sense of people taking an interest and the press focusing on the idea, it's the idea that seems to matter. It doesn't almost matter that it hasn't been fully articulated and ironed out in terms of the technology processes involved. And so again, in terms of value, that just sort of seemed a bit fascinating that the essence was set aside in terms of the story being the most important part. I'm at the moment in discussion with London agencies for funding the project further and for further research and development investment in order to set it up as a charitable donation system. And hopefully I've got a meeting next week with the British Museum, which is the largest museum, the museum that has the largest collection of coins and financial ephemera. So it just seemed the most sort of appropriate setting. But yeah, touching wood about that. It's not confirmed or anything, but that's the sort of follow-up since the residency has concluded so far. So there's just one more short film, a few minutes, which is from BBC News, and that you may have heard that the V&A have just appointed a games designer in residence, aiming to make museums more interactive and perhaps more digital. So I kind of was thinking as well about museums as bit of background music there. Museums are sort of banks of objects in a sense, and priceless treasures that have this sort of inestimable value, and possibly, more value within their vaults than in the Bank of England. Who knows? They never sell anything once they've acquired it, so that's also kind of fascinating in terms of the future. And for Money No Object, I spoke to various people who were in sort of key positions related to the theme, one of which was the British Museum Curator of Modern Money. And he's concerned about what and sort of thinking about what he might display in his cabinets in future. And he's sort of anticipating possibly sort of a cabinet full of mobile phones as payment transactions become more digital, more mobile. And what the impact of that is, and what we will collect in future, as well as what we will value, and where the value will be located if it's not necessarily in tangible material objects. So I'll just show this little film.
The Victoria and Albert Museum, not the place you'd imagine many people come to play video games. But now the V&A has appointed its first video games designer in residence. Sophia George has already won a BAFTA for one of her games. Now she's on a mission to change people's view of her industry.
I would really like the public's minds to be open about gaming, that it's not just about violence, that it can be about education, fun, playing games as families, and perhaps for them to inspire to make their own games as well.
All sorts of people, young and old, male and female, are now playing games in all sorts of ways, and it's an industry where Britain has plenty of skills. Now the V&A believes it's important that it recognises this aspect of our culture.
The V&A is very contemporary in its outlook. It's had a really vibrant contemporary programme for a long time, and actually all of the things that you see around you have been contemporary at one point. They've just got older as time has gone along.
As well as talking to visitors, Sophia aims to design a game based on the museum's collections. The V&A says its aim is to reflect the best in design from every era, and its games which are at the cutting edge right now. Rory Catherine-Jones, BBC News.
Yeah, definitely clap Sophia. I just found that story really inspiring, and her very inspiring person with her work as well. And the idea that museums and the future, in a sense, of digital technology is becoming increasingly integrated into the so-called Internet of Things, and where that point might merge all together, and what that might look like with smart technologies. That's the conclusion of my talk. Just this is a piece of work called Think Tank, so just wanted to leave you with the idea of thinking on what the future might bring. There's my website and Twitter address if you'd like to keep in touch. It'd be great to hear from you, and just to say thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the fair. Thank you.